In 1956, John Wayne made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A decision that led him to a desert. A decision that exposed him to something invisible, something deadly, something that the United States government knew about, but never warned him. This is the story of The Conqueror, the movie that didn't just fail at the box office, the movie that may have killed John Wayne and dozens of others who worked on it. 1954, Hollywood is in its golden age, and John Wayne is at the peak of his powers. Fresh off Hondo and preparing for The Searchers, Wayne receives a script that, frankly, should have stayed in the drawer. The Conqueror, a historical epic about Genghis Khan. Let that sink in for a moment. John Wayne, the most American actor who ever lived, playing Genghis Khan. Now, you might be thinking, surely someone said this was a terrible idea. And you'd be right. But this was Howard Hughes's pet project, the eccentric billionaire producer who was convinced he could make anything work with enough money and star power. Wayne himself would later call it the worst film I ever made. But in 1954, with Hughes offering him a percentage of the profits and a chance to play something different, Wayne signed on. The production budget? $4 million. Massive for its time. The location? The Utah desert, just outside a small town called St. George. Beautiful. Remote. Perfect for filming. And only 137 miles downwind from the Nevada test site. Let me say that again. 137 miles from where the United States government had been detonating atomic bombs. Between 1951 and 1953, just years before The Conqueror began filming, the Atomic Energy Commission detonated 11 nuclear weapons at the Nevada test site during what they called Operation Upshot Knothole. These weren't small devices. One bomb, called Harry, was 32 kilotons, more than twice the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The mushroom cloud rose 37,000 feet into the air. And the wind? The wind carried the radioactive fallout northeast, directly toward St. George, Utah. The government knew. They had instruments. They had data. They measured radiation levels that were hundreds of times above normal. But in the Cold War paranoia of the 1950s, this information was classified. National security, they said. The residents of St. George had no idea they were being dusted with radioactive particles. No idea that their children were playing in contaminated dirt. No idea that their livestock were dying from radiation poisoning. And in the summer of 1954, neither did John Wayne and his crew of 220 cast and crew members who arrived to film The Conqueror in the beautiful, deadly Utah desert. For 3 months, they worked in that desert. 3 months of breathing radioactive dust, rolling in radioactive sand, day after day after day. The Duke himself did his own stunts, falling, tumbling through the contaminated soil. Susan Hayward, his co-star, repeatedly fell from horses into clouds of radioactive dust during battle scenes. Director Dick Powell thought the red sand looked magnificent on camera. Between takes, cast members would eat lunch sitting on the ground. The wind would kick up dust, beautiful on film, deadly in reality. And they'd laugh it off, brush themselves clean, and continue shooting. But here's where it gets even worse. Howard Hughes was a perfectionist. He wanted authentic backgrounds for the interior scenes they'd shoot back in Hollywood. So he did something unthinkable. He shipped 60 tons of radioactive dirt from St. George back to the studio in Los Angeles. 60 tons. For months afterward, the cast and crew continued working with this contaminated material for indoor scenes, completely unaware they were handling a ticking time bomb. The movie was released in 1956. Critics destroyed it. Audiences stayed away. It lost money. Howard Hughes, embarrassed, eventually bought every existing print and locked them in a vault for decades. But the real horror was still to come. In 1963, just 9 years after filming, director Dick Powell died of cancer. He was 58. In 1975, Susan Hayward, John Wayne's co-star, died of brain cancer. She was 57. Pedro Armendariz, who played a Mongol chieftain, developed kidney cancer. In unbearable pain, and knowing he was dying, he took his own life in 1963. Agnes Moorehead, the veteran actress, died of uterine cancer in 1974. And then there was the Duke himself. In 1964, John Wayne was diagnosed with lung cancer. Surgeons removed his entire left lung and 2 ribs. He fought it. He beat it. He went back to work, making movies for another 15 years. But in 1979, the cancer returned with a vengeance. This time in his stomach, his intestines, his throat. On June 11, 1979, at the age of 72, John Wayne died. Before he passed, a reporter asked him about the Conqueror, about the cancer, about the radiation. Wayne's response was chilling. I suppose it's possible, but we all had to die of something. By 1980, 91 of the 220 cast and crew members from The Conqueror had developed cancer. 91 out of 220. That's 41%. 46 of them had already died from it. To put this in perspective, the normal cancer rate for a random group of Americans at that time was about 10%. The people who worked on The Conqueror had a cancer rate more than 4 times higher than the general population. For years, the government denied any connection. Coincidence, they said. John Wayne smoked 6 packs of cigarettes a day. Of course, he got lung cancer, they argued. But what about the non-smokers? What about the young crew members who died? What about the statistical impossibility of so many cancers in such a small group? In 1990, Congress finally passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, acknowledging that downwind residents and nuclear test workers had been harmed. Thousands of people, including many from St. George, Utah, received compensation, but not a single member of the Conqueror cast or crew was ever compensated. Legally, they couldn't prove the direct connection. The government's classified documents remained sealed. Today, the Nevada test site is a tourist attraction. You can take tours, see the craters, learn about the 928 nuclear tests conducted there between 1951 and 1992. St. George, Utah, is a thriving city of 95,000 people, but cancer rates there remained elevated for decades. An entire generation of downwinders suffered the consequences of atmospheric nuclear testing that their government assured them was completely safe. And somewhere in a vault, the original prints of the Conqueror still exist, possibly still radioactive after all these years. John Wayne made 180 films in his legendary career. He won an Oscar. He became an American icon. He embodied courage, strength, and resilience. But even the Duke couldn't fight an enemy he never knew existed. The movie that killed John Wayne wasn't killed by bad reviews or poor box office. It was killed by radiation, by governmental secrecy, by Cold War paranoia, by the arrogance of men who thought they could control the atom without consequence. They called him the Duke, the embodiment of American heroism. And in the end, he became a symbol of something else entirely. A reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from the enemies we can see, but from the ones we're never warned about.